And that'll make that less of a pain in the ass later. Remington Nylon 66. They were everywhere. I think they made over 1 million of them, but this particular model of it, it's a Mohawk 10 Charlie. There were only like 100,000 of them made, and not a very common thing. So this was made probably in the mid 70s when I was in grade school. They're not common, however, to find all of it in one piece, because people tend to take these guns apart. They don't understand the order they come apart in. They don't understand how basically fragile they are. And I just want to take this apart, clean all this rust off this thing, make it look better. I don't usually do 22s, but this is kind of a rare cat, and it sort of needs a little bit of our TLC. So let's do a little rabbit hole dive and getting on about this. Get the magazine out of this thing. 90% of all automatic equipment malfunctions stem from the mag. We'll remember that later. I've got it open. You're just going to take my word for it. There's nothing in there because the lighting is not right, but it's empty. So got to make sure of that. All right. I went around and coiled all these screws, and that's good because underneath that there's a bunch of orange schmutz down there, and I don't know how well this is showing up, but we're just taking the 2 screws out of the side here. There we go. Where people get into trouble on this gun is there's an order that it has to be done in. I'm not a Nylon 66 expert by any means. All right. The bolt here, we're just going to very, very lightly get underneath it and pop it up, and that comes straight out, just like it does on an 1100. All right. That will allow this entire top gizmo to come off. And we can see up inside of this, there's really no rust up inside of it. There is here at the edges. This is incidental, but this particular gun's in pretty good shape considering its age. Like you said, we figured out that it was made probably 74, 75, somewhere in there. But you don't want to be, eventually we'll get in here and we'll work on the sight. We'll see, but the sight's not dirt impacted. We may be able to just hang this in a pot, boil it for 30, 40 minutes, blow it out, all the living bejeebers out of it. It'll probably be okay. So sometimes you're getting into this spot where is the labor necessary to take something apart that doesn't move very much worth it? And generally I'm listening for crunching when I'm trying to move any of this. If it moves and it kind of grits, then you got to take it apart. In our case, not so much. All right. This is a sliding hammer design here where the bolt, we've taken it out, but this is the bolt here, right? And this is the hammer, all right? So we're just gonna lock the hammer back to get it out of the way right now. We're gonna put it back here and cock it. If it did not already fall out, this is the ejector. And then the next step in this thing is to take the barrel out of it. The barrel is not screwed in. The barrel is held by this screw right here. And we're going to just go ahead and pop this out and loosen it up a bit. Okay. We'll loosen this up. And then as I'm loosening it, there is a plate here that holds it in that rises. You see how this falls? This rises and it cuts the barrel loose. So the barrel's held into this by that device going like that, all right? So this gives us a good look here at the inside of the gun, and it wasn't that dirty. You see, there's not a lot of yak on it. It's rusted up. We're gonna hang it in Thor here and just knock all this rust down off of it. And in fact, I'm gonna while I'm waiting here, I'm gonna throw a little bit of Croil on these 2 threads here and see if we can get lucky and get this front sight to actually come off. The gun has been wet, and I would like to take it off and get it what's underneath. Because it's been wet and it's impacted, it's actually worth trying to take apart. We're gonna try for that. All right. Nylon gun. We'll go ahead and we'll take this the rest of the way out. Do I do it now or no? No, here we go. So we got to pull the bolt back. And then this piece here that holds the barrel on, that comes up. And then there's a plate that mounts in front of it that I do not know what it does, but we're just going to set these two here so that we can remember what their overall orientation is. So then when the barrel plugs into that surface right there goes in this slot right here. Let me get it up against the towel where they can see it right there. So that slot goes in here and it just holds the whole thing in. There's not a lot going on in a 22. You don't have a lot of energy available to mess things up. You also don't have a lot of energy to operate things either. So it's a two-footed deal. All right. The bolt just comes out the front end of it, right? And you have a stud here to keep the spring from getting all jacked up. And the bolt is not very dirty on this either. The problem is this, there's not a lot of dirt, but there is rust. And that's kind of odd, but that's sort of where we're at here. Okay. I've pulled the trigger and let the hammer down. And we'll bring the hammer guide, which is a piece of hollow pipe here. You see that line running down the center of it? It's hollow. So that will go there, and that's going to leave us with triggers and disconnects down inside this gun. So as I'm pulling on the trigger, you can see that sliding, and then this part here would drop and the block can go over the top. And then when it recocks, when the block comes back up, you have to turn this loose in order for it to reset. I will attempt to lay all that out on the surface here in a little bit. This D10 pin, you push down on that spring, just take the load off of it, and then it should come back at you here. I'm sorry I had to get my fingers in front of that. This D10 pin has a head on it, you see? So all you're going to do is get your screwdriver behind that head and pull it to the rear. That will allow the spring to come out for the safety ball, and then a fairly large ball is going to fall out of this hole. It's pretty big. Try to not lose it. That's probably important. Okay, so now we have a couple of springs that we have to disconnect here, and we have to take the sear out next. I believe, if I'm not wrong, the sear comes out next. And that is that pin right there. And we're going to have to reposition because my body is out of joint here. So hang on a minute. So far I'm kind of happy because there's not a lot of dirt loading in this gun. So I'm willing to bet that other than the rust that we're going to knock down, the problem with this gun might have been the magazine. I don't know. All right. There's a pin that goes in right here. We took that pin out and then the trigger guard comes out. You can see how it hooks in and then the pin holds it down. Pretty straightforward. That leads us to taking out the hang on a minute here. Took the trigger guard off, and we got to get the safety out. That's right. I'll drive this pin out right here, and that will allow the safety to pop out like this. And that pin kind of goes over that hump like that, and that's what holds that all in, one or the other. We'll get down there when we get down there. So let me get this one the rest of the way out. So that comes out. All these pins appear to be the same size, and the only way you would know them apart is from, you see that silver mark there going by? That silver mark would tell you that it's being borne on by this, but I don't think it matters. It's not a very tolerance critical gun. Now, I'll tell you what I am going to do. I'm going to take a couple of pictures way down inside this thing. God, that's an ugly guy right there. I'm going to take a couple of pictures. I'm going to blow these pictures way up, and I'm going to show you what I want to see. So what I see here in this picture is a coil spring with a hook on it. And I see a fairly large mousetrap spring down in there with a fancy rear end on it. But what I'm trying to do here is get some contextual clues as to how this thing was together, because when we go to put it back together again, it's not going to make a tremendous amount of sense. Okay. Then the next thing after that's the trigger. And that's on this pin right here. Now there's a spring holding that in there. So you have to get that spring to snap up off of it. Let's see what we got here. Okay. See, so now we have the end of a spring right here. Wait a minute, I gotta get this thing to focus right. There we go. Where are we? We are, okay, there we are. So now you see we have the end of a spring here, and the end of that spring hooked onto this piece right here. And I'm just showing you the pictures that I'm taking because it makes sense. So right there, that's the part right there where it hooks on. Okay, good to know. It's a plastic gun, so everything in this gun that needs to wear on something is molded in. It's metal that's molded into the plastic. So you can see the little dot there in the center. It's literally a plastic rivet that's hanging onto this metal piece. So this is the part when you pull the trigger, that's going to slide that way, and this piece is going to drop down and allow the hammer to slide over the top of it. It's just like the bolt on a Remington 700. It's all here. All the basic parts are here. And the next piece we got to get out of here is the sear. And there is the king of the mousetrap springs on here. Now, let me take a look at this. So the next part that's got to come out, I have lifted up on the disconnector and allowed this to come by. And this, this is the sear. And the way we know that is there's a ledge right here like this, and that sliding block would come back and cock up against that, and then when you drop the support out from underneath this, the block falls and it goes forward. I hope that's clear as mud. Now there's another mousetrap spring down in here, and I want to photograph the orientation of that spring. That was in there like this. You can see all the fuzz on this thing. We'll get rid of the fuzz. And then it's a fairly fancy duty in there, but what we know is that the spring went in the gun this way. Don't trust your memory, because what'll happen is you're going to get hung up looking for a part or something, and it's going to be 3 weeks later. So when I'm holding this spring here, I'm holding it in the orientation that it goes in the gun. That'll help. And that leaves us with the disconnector. The disconnector's got a small spring on it. Again, another picture. If you guys think I remember all this stuff, you're nuts. I've got the attention span of a sand gnat. So, okay, and then that's going to leave. What is that? Is that trigger? That's gear drift. So that is the. There we go. Okay, that's a pretty decent sized spring. Okay. So there's a large spring pulling this thing backwards here. You see it? I'm pushing in with my finger and it's pulling. That's a pretty heavy spring. It's not very large. So what I'm looking at is how that thing is fastened and what are the consequences of driving this pin out. So we're going to drive this pin, and we're going to make sure that the punch still has control of this part, because when I pull it, it's going to pop. And all right, nope, it slid over on me, so all the tension's gone. Okay. Okay, that comes out there, and then that has to come off the front. Okay. I'm trying to take this thing apart in such a way that I can put it back together again, and you will run into this. So this spring appears to be hooked over the front of this nylon bar here. So I'm going to see if I can get up underneath this and pop this hook. Let's see if I can get in there and pop that. No, it's not going to let me. Not going to let me do this the easy way. There we go. This is the spring I was talking about. You can see the hook here, and the hook goes over the top of this nylon piece and down around and under. So now we know that. And then we have this, and I'm going to take a photo of this part because this comes apart. This looks like this actually will pivot out. So I'm going to take this photo right here to remind me. Hang on a minute, I got to get under here. There we go. So now I know what end of what springs go into what. We'll try to line all this up. This is just a magazine release. And the magazine slides on this way. There's a stud here. Right there, there's a stud. And that slides in there like that and locks in. It's not very sophisticated and it works. You pull back and this comes out. So, like most 22s, this is a wiggly, wobbly, see that? So that might be an issue later on when we're talking about failures to feed, because that's why we were sent in here. But by and large, this gun used to be fed through the butt, and up under and into a mechanism that brought the rounds around the side of the trigger mechanism and spit them up into the breech right here. And I think when they did this was kind of a compromise. They even made this, as a bolt gun, and they even made it as a lever gun. But we got it down about as far as I'm going to take it down. And as you can see, it's not that dirty. There's just some rust on the outside of it. This is pretty good. Let's see if we can get it back together again. We're going to go throw everything up and boil it. And we're going to see if we can make this rust here kind of go away. You see the rust there? So for our success point, we'll be looking at right here, the Remington name. Right there, see it says Remington. We'll be looking at that, and that'll be the next part. We'll come up. We'll just boil this in some water for about 30 or 40 minutes. Put it on a carding wheel like we've done in a whole bunch of other episodes, and see if we can make it at least look less heinous. A lot of times when you're working on a gun, you can rebuild the action on the outside using the available pins to get the spacing right. This works well on revolvers and everything. So here's the best we can come up with. When the safety is pulled back to the safe position, it lifts this transfer bar up right here, and it allows the trigger motion. And remember now, this is really loosey-goosey. But when you let this come back down, this sets in a notch and it's allowed to push. All right? There's a couple of springs we don't have. We don't have this big honking spring right here, which when we put it back on that pin and wind it up around this thing is going to be pushing up pretty hard. The small surface here, right? And this surface, there's an angled surface right here. Sorry about my arm. But these sit in this relationship. And this is trying like crazy to go forward. But it can't because it's held there by a wedge. Now, if you release the support here, this will drive right over the top. It's just like an override trigger in a 700 or any one of a variety of other guns, Model 70, whichever. So to make this go off, you need to let this piece drop. And I'm going to simulate a little bit of spring pressure here. I'm just going to put a little bit of spring pressure on this so that I'm pulling forward on this disconnector mechanism, all right? So when you pull the trigger, it shoves this forward and that drops. And when it drops, the bolt takes off to the front. But we still got our finger on the trigger. So when we push down on this, that will pop up. When that pops up, this is allowed, and I'm sure it had to go a little bit further forward than that. This will have come a little bit further forward. And that's allowed to reset. Now, this will have been up. Again, we're not down inside the gun. So let me see if I can get this one more time and get it right. All right. So that's how we're sitting after the bolt comes back. We're cocked because we can see that this piece here is being supported. And then when I turn this loose, this will trip back in and allow us to pull the trigger again. That's the best I can come up with describing how this thing works. It's actually fairly well engineered. There are, for instance, there's a knife edge right here. And this knife edge allows this thing to rock back and forth like this at 0 friction, while in the meantime allowing the rocking piece down on the bottom. I'm sure I did not describe this right, but it's the best thing I can come up with. All semi-automatic triggers have some sort of sliding component, and they also have something that the act of the gun going off will disconnect the trigger from the ability to push the bars. So if you did that, then this could come to the rear, right? So if that all went that way, that could come back again until you turn the trigger loose and that pops back down. All semi-automatic triggers have some semblance of this set of componentry, with the exception that every gun does it slightly differently. But I want you to notice that we didn't really clean these parts. The inside of this gun was spectacular. So again, we're coming back to the failures to feed. We're looking at the bolt face, and we're not seeing a whole lot going on here in the bolt face. There wasn't even very much dirt. The extractor is free to move. There's very little that's going to prevent this thing from feeding correctly. The rim will go right up underneath there like that. So this is all right. And actually I've got it upside down, but just don't worry about it. So this is the extractor ejection off to that side. The ejector plate that went on the outside of the gun rides in this groove right here. So when the bolt gets all the way to the rear, that little notch shows up and bing, out it goes. It just flicks it out of the gun like that and it comes back down again. Very simple, very straightforward. And these guns actually have, the Nylon 66 have pretty good reputation of running right. They're kind of like a Marlin 60. Once you set one of those things up the right way, or a 1022, they go forever. Personally, unless you're into collecting 22s, just go spend $300, buy a 1022 and be done with it. This is the pin that the disconnector gets supported on. We had it here. So in the reverse order, the disconnector goes in first. This spring bar right here, this hook right here, has to hook over this piece in the bottom. It's got to go over the outside. So what I'm gonna do here is tip this back a little bit and just make sure that the nose of that spring goes where I want it to, and it will. And then I'm gonna make sure this rides down, and I'm looking through the hole here to see if I'm lined up, and that looks like I'm lined up, and that pin should go through there. All right, you will see other videos that tell you how to take this gun and put it back together again, that tell you that that's a split pin. And on a pin where the cartridges have to come up through the butt, up through a hole underneath, and then get into the feeding position, that had to be a split pin. This one did not, because it's magazine fed. And trust me, Remington took the opportunity to make the gun simpler by one piece. The sear is on a larger pin. This is a larger pin than every other pin, and there is only one hole in the side of the gun that will accept it. That is correct. And it's that hole right there. This one is too big, and I still don't know what that one does yet, but it doesn't go all the way through. So that almost looks like an adjustment port. But every other pinhole in the side of this gun is too small except for that one. So that's telling me that's where the sear goes. We can do the idiot check here. If we put the nose of the sear here, and we put the edge of the bar here, and this is right about where this thing sits when it's at full cock, okay? And I'm in and out now. We're down a long axis here. I'm not trying to mess you up. But when I took this thing apart, you remember I had this picking straight up in the air because there is a honking spring that's got to go up inside this thing when we put it together. And that spring is going to be bearing, let me get my bearings right here. That spring is going to be bearing up against that surface right there, all right? So that surface, which means this will then have to be wound up so that it's placing an upward tension. So if we wound this spring up, this thing's going to be wanting to bounce this way, you see? So now I got to figure out the logistics of doing that. Every time you guys break a screwdriver or I don't know, anytime you get something that looks like a pin, get you a drawer full of pins. They're just oddball pieces parts, all right? Out of that, I found me something that's exactly the right diameter to let me do this. We know that the spring's got to wind up, so it's got to go in here this way, right? Now if I take this blind pin and I stick it down in here, it unitizes this as one piece. Now you got to keep a little bit of load on it so that it slides. But now I can deal with this whole thing as one piece, you see. The spring is supported on this end. So this is the side we got to start our chase from. Because as soon as this thing pops under, it's going to want to cock the spring, and we would like to have it supported. On the other side, it'll just dive out on us. All right? We'll get up under there. Get that in there, and now I've got it pretty much right where I want it, right? Okay. Now I'm looking right there. Okay. And now we gotta chase this out. So you see the blind pin starting to come out over here? If we get away with this, we should have enough support. See, that's loaded up, right? Blind pin's gone, and we've got the sear in. I know that took a lot of edits to do because we wanted you to actually be able to see it. These little things are worth their weight in gold. And you know where this pin goes? Back in the pin drawer. Because you know, remember that piece of 2x4 you got? Yeah, same thing. All right, so this now can go in front of that, under there, boom, and now we're set down. And then this also has to set down underneath there like that. So far now we've got the sear in, and we've got the disconnector in. Okay, let's make sure that's not supposed to line up there, and it's not, and we're good. All right, very good. That's two. So we've got the disconnector in and the sear in. Now the third one's going to be the trigger, if I'm not wrong. Trigger is next. Okay. There is a boss sticking out of the side of the receiver right here. That means that the sear had to mount off to one side. I could not see that from the other side, and then the trigger is going to go through this slot right here and grab that little slot we were talking about, and that's what's going to make all this slide. Make sure I got this right. It goes in there. And it goes, where's the hole here? There it is. It holds all the way in the back. Okay, I may be able to get lucky here and hook this spring up first. So there's a coil spring. There's a coil spring that snapped over that. So if we're looking at it, that coil spring is right here. You can see it. This is what provides the rotational effort to move the spring to the front. And then we will just find the pivot hole. There's the pivot. Now you can see that we're pulling on the disconnector with the spring, unless the disconnector is lifted up, at which time it, let me lift this up, at which time it pulls on nothing. So we're, so far so good. All right, so now I can put this in and wiggle on the trigger until it chases that screwdriver out, bang, and we're there, right? Okay, so far so good. I think we're working well here. That's pulling that forward, pulls forward, and then when that's kicked up, that disconnects, and then it reconnects. Bang. So this all works a lot better when it's inside its housing. Building it on the outside is a way to get an idea of what it does, but curvatures will get in the way. Pins, when they're only sitting down in a hole like this, a pin can move, so that can disturb you. But in terms of just overall, I built that on the outside of the gun, so I knew how the heck it worked. I don't know what else to tell you there. So we're working backwards up this list here in the safety, right? So what this safety does, this safety is going to ride up the pin, and we had a pin that had a silver mark on it. See that silver mark right there? That silver mark is where the nose of this has been riding up. And as it rides up, it lifts the disconnector bar up out of the way and forces the gun to stay disconnected, and it kills the trigger so the trigger doesn't do anything. Let it back down again, now the trigger's moving stuff. So that's what the safety does. And then I want to see if I can't see that. Hang on a minute there. Okay, right behind the back end of the trigger, there's a slot. If you see that slot right there in the back, this sits up inside of that slot, and then that big detent ball is going to push down on this. Whoops, can't see that. This detent ball is going to push down on this this little tit sticking up here, and it's either going to be, the ball's either going to be in here like this, or it's going to be up here like that. Bang, bang. That's how it's going to work. That was clear as mud, but trust me, it'll work. So we'll come in here. We'll let that, hang on a minute, I'll stop moving here in just a second, Bruno. Okay, we'll get up under this, and now we're under this bar, so that as we push this in and take this pin, it will pivot off the pin like that. And then as the safety moves to the rear, okay, let me get a better angle on this. As the safety moves to the rear, let me relight, there we go. As the safety moves to the rear, it pushes up on that sear bar. You see it right there? Right there. It'll push up on that sear bar, and that'll disconnect it. Okay, so then to give this some snap action, let me reset. Give us a little bit of snap action here. Detent ball. Sweep the floor before you do this. Drop the ball in. Ball goes in. Spring. Right? And then the little pin, and make sure that the little hickey on the pin is on the outside so you can grab it and spit it back out the next time. That goes in. There's a hole. How far down is that hole? It's not very far. There's a hole in here, and this pin's just going to go in that way, right? So we're going to push it down and try to not shoot it across the damn room. Okay, there. I've got the spring pushed down. It goes into the hole like that, and then this gets pushed forward until the end of the spring grabs it, and then it's not going anywhere anymore. And when we're done, the cover plate's sitting over the top of this anyway, so it won't get there. And then just for snicks and gribbles here, we're going to put just a touch of oil. All the ownership materials that I see say don't oil this thing, because all the oil does is collects dirt, and the entire thing's riding in a nylon bearing anyway. We don't have extremely high rotational speeds. We don't have to worry about it. So not a lot of oil for this gun. For me, I don't like springs getting oily. Now, you can see here, right up where my index finger is, when the safety is back, it's safe and the disconnector's disconnected. When you push it forward, the disconnector and everything turns back on again. I kind of actually think I got that. And then the last thing for us, we did the same, and then the last thing we're going to do now is put trigger guard back on, right? You could run this without the trigger guard, I think, if you really wanted to watch it all work. I love you guys, but I don't want to watch it all work. We're just going to plug that in. Now, how do you know whether or not a gun's really been cleaned or not? You pay somebody to clean a gun, and this little bit of schmutz is right back here in the back of the trigger guard. That means that somebody didn't take it apart and clean it. Now, on a steel gun, it's more of a problem than on one of these, but if you're going to take a gun apart and clean it, clean it. Okay, that snaps in there. That pin goes in that hole right there. See how hard I'm hitting this? You don't have to beat the terwillikers out of this thing. You're going to be fine. And there it is. Now we have the entire trigger group back together again. And pretty much what's left is just putting the bolt on top and putting the barrel back in. Now the barrel and the harness and everything else was in Thor while we were talking. So let's go get a look at that here. We have a nested spring here. And again, I don't like springs to rust, so I'm just going to introduce a little lubrication on the springs just because I don't want them to rust. That's all. Typically, nested springs are wound in opposite directions. These are both wound the same, but as Bruno pointed out, technically they are inside of a tunnel, so we should not have a problem here. This is the firing pin spring, the firing block, which pushes on the back of this and moves this in and out, right? So you can technically load this first, and there's a groove in here that lets you pick this up over the top. So you see here at my fingernail, this track is taller and then it necks down lower. That lets this cocking piece come up over everything more, putting it back. It's kind of a convoluted setup here. We're going to come in, lift this up, set this back into that hole there. And we are way past where most normal people would take this gun down. We're going to come back here, but now we got to get around the sear. And that's going to mean that we have to push down on the trigger to disconnect that, drop the sear out of the way. Now, I've never really figured out a good way to do this. That has to be held down there, and then this is pushed over the top of it and allowed to cock. Do not pull the trigger at this moment. This will wind up in a roll door, so don't do that. Now, we've got the inside spring, which goes in here. When this block comes up, it hits this, which hits the firing pin. Bang, right there. That's all we got to get, right? So now this has to go inside that tube and be lifted up and brought back. Now that's held here by everything else because it's an unlocked bolt system. It's just a 22. So this is not locked to the rear by anything. And you really can't lock it to the rear by anything, but you can stick this little gizmo in here and it'll keep it from flying out the front end of the gun. Boom. Okay? Be careful with this piece. I have seen nylon 22s. This piece gets broken. It's just a piece of nylon loaded in shear. So be gentle to this and don't make this do anything while you got it out of the gun. All right. I'm looking at a schematic diagram that says that this plate goes in front. Okay? So we drop this down in here. We can get a turn or two on this screw just to have a turn or two on this screw so it doesn't fall out. Okay? The barrel, and you got to admit, that came out really, really nice. There's the Remington. Here's the picture we're comparing the word Remington to from when we took the gun apart. Yeah, there's that. Okay, so this slides in from the front. Slides in, slides up, push up on a screw, right? And then this is tightened down. So you see that? This is pushing back on a bolt a little bit. So the question becomes, how much excess headspace is there on a 22? And the answer is there is absolutely none because the bolt's not locked. There is no abutment and headspace is technically zero. It stops where it stops. Headspace is a whole discussion for another day. Okay, we'll get up underneath here and we'll tighten that up. We'll just flip this over. This is coin slotted for a quarter. I have some coin slot screwdriver bits that are perfect for this. That's just designed to fit down in there and come up on this, okay? So there you go. Coin slotted screwdriver bit. Do you gotta have this? No, you don't, but it's nice anyway. All right. So I'm not killing this thing. I'm just bringing it down. We'll put a little snug on it when we're all done. So now the barrel retention device is in, and that brings us over to the side. All right. The ejector is kind of common sense. That little hook's going to hook the back end of the case and flip it out. So that goes into that hole right there. Now comes the real magic. Stand by for a moment. This was just a standard one-pass conservation through the tank, and we knocked all that rust off the side of it. This sight is a thing to behold because it's all held together with that one rivet. There's a screw here that turns and moves this side to side, and it's all done on a barrel shroud. It's pretty cool. We have to take this tab back out again though, and I'm just using a little bit of a prying action there because we have to go down over the top. Boom, there we go. This goes back in here. Okay. And then the screws, we clean these screws up. They were a little rusty, no big deal. Get that down far enough here to bring those in here. There we go. That one goes through there. This one is just a little bit misaligned. No big deal. The boss is on the other side of these screws. Hang on to these. Why are we obstructed there? We are just lightly obstructed. Ball peen hammer, please. Right there. Thank you. I'm not going to hit it really hard, but I'm going to have to make it go through a little bit of schmutz in the nylon. Okay. And then it has to go back in the hole on the other side. I'm wondering if this is putting a little bit of load on it. It was. Don't drive it into the studs on the other side. That blue-handled screwdriver, please. Thank you. You don't have to drive it. And this is just a cover plate, so it does not have to be beat down really hard. You just got to pull it down enough that it's not going to let it go. Okay, there's that, and then there's one last thing we had to do. I had mentioned before that I wanted to take the front sight off. Boy, that cleaned up nice, didn't it? This thing was orange, remember? There's some pitting on the gun. The damage is done, and there's not much we're going to be able to do about it. You just find that screw slot right there. Run that down. But there was rust all up underneath it. The sight needed to come off. The screws were nasty. We'll just bump these down and we'll go from there. Okay. Very good. We're all the way together. And now, after we've done all of this work, I'm going to tell you that this is not a bad looking piece of kit now that we got it cleaned up. But now we got to go look at the failure to feed problem, shall we? So here it is out in broad daylight. Gotta love it. We've done the safety checks on it to make sure it's not going to do anything stupid. The last thing we're going to do is we're only going to give it 2 rounds to work with. We got to make sure all semi-automatic guns that you've worked on a fire control mechanism, you got to make sure that the gun's going to stop. So that means 2 rounds in the magazine. We're going to make sure we've locked it forward. Feeds 1. We fed 1, you see, and it's stopped. We're going to do that one more time. We've got 1 in the chamber. We've got 1 in the magazine. We're going to make sure here, any time that you work up inside of the fire control mechanism on a gun, you got to make sure that the fire control mechanism is going to do what you want it to do. Now, I've got the safety in the on position, and the trigger is dead. Take the safety off, and we get 1 round, right? Okay, so now I'm pretty sure it's going to do what it's supposed to do. Okay, let me grab a couple more rounds here. We'll do a total of 3, just to prove that it's supposed to do what it's supposed to do. And then other than that, we're just making noise for the sake of making noise. This was a heck of a project, because I'm going to tell you, there were a lot of nylon 66s made. This particular gun is a Model 10 Charlie Mohawk, magazine fed. I figure it was made about the time I was in the 5th grade, which is right around 1975 or so. And I think we got this one. We've handled the failures to feed. It could have been anything. There wasn't a lot of dirt loading in it. On guns like this, you run down all of the problems until the problem shows up. And in this particular case, I really don't care because I don't work on 22s much. Beginning gunsmiths, there was an entire age of 22s that were made right after World War II until you get into, well, now, that were just garbage. They were garbage when they were made. The visible loaders, all that stuff. So if you're going to get into a 22, don't do it for a living because there's no money in them. Because, you know, $75, you said it was going to be $76. And on that note, we're back to where we were with that Marlin Model 30. Should you do it and can you do it are two totally different answers. I hope this helped. I hope I got my hands out of the way. I hope maybe you learned something about a gun you'd never seen before. And as always, it has been a pleasure to go down a rabbit hole with you guys.